Welcome to Theme Weavers, your weekly wisdom for weaving yoga themes into your classes to inspire your students. We're your hosts, Heidi
and Farron. Welcome to episode 6 of Theme Weavers. Today we're going to talk about the 8 limbs of yoga found in Sutra 2.29 and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. In case this is the first episode you're listening to, please check out episode 2 of Theme Weavers podcast for details and background on the structure of how and why to weave themes through your yoga classes. If you choose to use today's teaching on the 8 limbs as your theme and take advantage of our inspo sheet, then please find a way to turn our voices into yours. Make this theme authentic to you specifically.
Thanks, Farron. We're excited to be here today and to be totally honest with you all that are listening. This episode was completely born out of an informal conversation between Farron and myself about theming and why we practice and what we want to deliver to our students. So we wanted to bring you in on the conversation today, and conversation is key. We'll wrap it all up at the end for you nicely, but we want you to be with us as we talk about the 8 limbs of yoga. So in case you don't know, what are the 8 limbs of yoga? So we know that yoga is a practice of transforming and benefiting every part of our life. We've talked about that the last few episodes. And it's not just our 60 minutes we spend on our rubber yoga mat, wearing our yoga clothes, calling it a yoga class, right? We've gone through that already. The reason that we know that it's not just a practice on our mat is because Patanjali laid out for us in the Yoga Sutras this 8-limbed path of yoga is what it's known as. Each of these 8 limbs we'll get into as their own themes later on, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of a general overview of what the 8 limbs of yoga are. So when we talk about it, you know what we're talking about. It's this path that we walk on, and each step, each limb builds upon the one before it. So the first limb is called the Yamas, and these are restraints. They're moral disciplines and practices that are really concerned with the world around us, outside of us, and how we interact with it, which is really relevant in everything that we do because we're constantly interacting with things outside of ourselves, right? Not just people, but animals and the environment and the world and all that stuff. So Yamas talk about if we can learn to be kind, truthful, and use our energy in a worthwhile way, we're going to benefit ourselves and our practice, but also we're going to benefit everything and everyone around us. So we start with how we interact outside of ourselves. And then next limb is the niyamas, which are the opposite. These aren't restraints in our actions. These are positive duties, observances, things that we need to do directed toward ourselves. You can also look at them as actions toward the outside world because it's building upon the limb before it, the yamas, but they go from outward and more obvious, like saucha, which is cleanliness, all the way to the most inward of Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to a higher power. You with me, Farron?
I'm still here. I'm in it.
Because it gets a little boring just hearing my voice talk. Do you want to share what the third limb is?
Yeah. So that's the one that we generally think of as yoga. Like we're going to go to a yoga class because we're going to practice the third limb, which is asana. That word means in Sanskrit, it means posture or seat because that was the original yoga pose, is just taking a seat in order to do the following limbs. But we have turned it into something a little bit more fancy, and now we have a ton of different postures and they continue to evolve. After we practice these different asanas, we are then able to find a seat for stillness. And I mean, it's easier once you've moved your body to then sit still for a longer period in order to then meditate and be more comfortable and not be pulled away by our busy minds and distractions of
100%.
our physical body.
And because it's this 8-limb path, technically we're supposed to be practicing Yama and Niyama before we even practice asana, right? We're building upon it. I think we forget that sometimes.
And it's also, I guess I think of it kind of backwards as like, you don't want to step onto your mat and like practice yoga with quotation marks, but then step off of your mat and then be an asshole. Right. So like you have to like practice the yamas and the niyamas well.
That's right. And when you can't practice physically asana, this 8-limb path still gives you so many avenues and ways to still be practicing yoga in every action and thought that we live and engage with, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so once you've done the asana, you've learned how to take a seat so you can be still. We then practice our 4th limb of yoga called pranayama, which we've talked about before. That's breathing techniques, how we control and restrain our breath and notice the energy that the breath leaves behind. And there's a bunch of different techniques. We share some on inspo sheets with you after each episode. You've probably practiced some in class in different yoga classes depending on the teacher. Maybe I think Ujjayi breath, that victorious breath, is that ocean sounding breath, is probably the most popular that we tend to see.
The Darth Vader
Yeah, it's called that too sometimes.
breath.
So after we practice our pranayama, that fourth limb, we start to get a little bit less obvious, if you will, in our practices. So the fifth limb is called pratyahara, and that's sense withdrawal. I think this is likely the first thing that we do when we think that we're meditating, right? Like you sit there, you close your eyes, and you're blocking off your sense of vision. Pratyahara is when we start to block off any of our senses. We focus on drawing in, like focusing on the way we're breathing or different sensations within our body. Sometimes if you take a mudra, like a hand gesture, you'd be focusing on the feeling of your thumb and pointer finger touching each other, right? So you're focusing on going inward within yourself, things that are happening within you to start to tune out the outside world. So that's the fifth limb. It's less obvious, right? You could be sitting there having a conversation with somebody and they could be totally tuning you out. Right? It's the thing. So what's the sixth limb, Farron?
Dharana, focused concentration. In order to focus on something, the senses must withdraw so that all of the attention is put on that one point of concentration. In order to draw our senses in, we must focus and concentrate intently. So it's kind of like it comes after pratyahara, which is sense withdrawal. Now we're just focusing on one single thing.
Yeah, it helps your mind not wander, right? That monkey mind starts to stop when you can focus on just one thing,
Yeah.
even if it's for a few moments at a time and then you come back to it. But once you've hit that sixth limb, dhyana is the seventh limb, and it's meditative absorption. And this one's a little bit hard to describe, but it's when you take all of the tools that your teacher has given you and all these different practices, and you're doing the thing, right? You're settled, you're focused, you're concentrating, you're meditating, but you can't really do this limb of yoga. It's more the spontaneous result of something that you're doing. So it's like when you're meditating and all of a sudden time goes by and then you don't realize that time's going by. And then you have this thought like, oh, I'm meditating. So in that time when you don't think about what's happening and it's just happening, that, in my opinion, is limb 7, dhyana, because you're no longer thinking about one thing. You're not thinking about meditating. It's just happening, right? And this time goes by. All of a sudden, you don't know how the time passed. You're just in it. This is when you're absorbed in the act of meditating. But again, it's nothing you can do. It's sort of the byproduct of doing the other 6 limbs. Don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really cool because you don't know when you're in it until you're out of it again.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, how did I do that? And you're so busy thinking about how you got there that you can't get there again until you release that focus of
Yeah.
wanting to achieve something.
Have you ever achieved that state?
Yeah. Not often though.
Yeah, not
And
very often.
significantly less often since I've become a teacher. And
Ooh.
I think it's because it's very difficult for me to take off my teacher and mentor and educator hat, even when I'm a student. Like I find I'm constantly thinking about either like, oh, I love what that person did. I'll have to remember that after class to bring that into my own experience. Or I hate what's happening right now. How is this called yoga? And then I'm so wrapped up in my thoughts around that that I have trouble detaching. But when I used to practice more as this is a lie. Hang on. I'm telling you a lie. I don't mean to be lying.
That's not part of the yamas, Heidi. Truthfulness.
I know. Right. Okay. But I'm not lying intentionally. I'm
Okay.
lying as I'm saying this out loud. So let me just clarify that. I have a very difficult time since being a teacher in the space of when I'm teacher. So the places where I teach, it's hard for me to be a student. But when I can go someplace and be completely anonymous and just show up as a student without any other responsibilities, those are the moments that I reach that space. Or it's in the moments that I don't even think about the fact that I'm completely immersed in an experience of yoga. So I think like an example, I'm like really into live music and concerts. My husband and I are big, huge Fish fans of the band Fish. If you've never heard of them, go listen and maybe you'll like them. But we love going to see them live. And sometimes I will be so immersed in the experience of the music and the energy of the crowd that I'm nowhere other than exactly where I am. And I'm thinking about nothing. And I'm just there. And like the corners of my mouth are turned up. And I'm just like in this collective experience of humans who are just somewhere to be and experience like the love of life and creation. And in those moments, that's when I actually sort of feel more of the eighth limb of yoga, which we haven't talked about yet. But in those moments, that's when I'm completely immersed in the experience without even recognizing that I'm doing that. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love how you can experience yoga and like meditation around other people. You don't have to just be like sitting alone underneath a tree.
I have trouble finding it in those times when I'm purposefully trying to make myself experience something. It's very difficult for me to experience it.
Yeah, same. I think the times that I've experienced it is when I'm at like a campfire. This has happened several times actually. At a campfire, staring into the flames, there's like people around me and everyone's talking, but for some reason I can tune them out. I'm focused on the flame, and then all of a sudden I'm like, "Whoa, how long have I been here?" Like I'm completely somewhere else.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. I think we talk a lot about in chromatic yoga the elements of nature and how they show up. And I think different elements can also support you in finding that what we're talking about, right? They can help you in finding that meditative absorption.
Yeah.
Different people, different ways. Like for some people, it's being near water and watching the ocean or the river roll in and out, and just being with water can help them completely absorb into that experience without thinking about absorbing into that experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Maybe fire is my element then.
Yeah. Okay. So once we've had this experience where you're no longer thinking about meditating, but you just are, our final limb, our eighth limb, samadhi, bliss or enlightenment. So after we've reorganized our relationship with the outside world, right? We've gone through our ethics, our morals, our restraints, our actions, our postures, our breath, all of the steps after we've gone there, we then come to this final stage of bliss. And the word samadhi is talking about the ability to see equally and without disturbance from the mind. So without our experience being conditioned by the things that we like, the things that we don't like, the habits, our samskaras that we talked about last time, right? Without a need to judge or become attached to any particular aspect. That is bliss. It's really difficult to explain, in my opinion, unless you felt it. And it's also really difficult to live in a state of samadhi, don't you
Yeah,
think?
it's like a fleeting moment, like, oh, you have it, and then it's gone. And then you have to try again and do all the steps all over again.
Yeah, you just have to live in this intentional space of clean, purposeful living and interaction, and you find it in moments. But I remember in our 300-hour training when we started studying tantric yoga and philosophy, how it talks about that Patanjali ends at this eighth limb. Like, you've done it. You've reached this state of bliss, of samadhi, and now you're there. And Tantra yoga talks about, like, okay, cool, you've reached this, but now what? You have to learn how to come back down and still live with that while engaging and interacting with the world around you. You can't just live in this, like, oh, I've done it, I'm here, and that's it. Like, that you have to be able
Levitating.
to still, yeah, like floating under your tree. That's just not
Yeah,
practical. It's
right.
not real. So how do we then bring it back? Like, we find it and then we cultivate it and we bring it back into our lives without losing it.
Yeah, love that.
Right. So, what's the point of this, Farron? Why are we even talking about this eight limbed path? And why are we theming a class around all of this giant, lofty stuff?
Yeah, I think it's to help us solve some problems, right? Why do people come to yoga in the first place? Like, why are they drawn to it? Sometimes, the doctor tells you, go try yoga because you're stressed out, or you need to be stronger, or more flexible, or find balance, or whatever. Maybe it's a doctor recommendation, or maybe you've just heard from other friends that, yoga is going to help you out. So, the eight limbed path of yoga is a really powerful tool that we can use to solve all of these different problems. It's a completely holistic approach that addresses the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual aspects of our being. So it can solve problems like when you're practicing asana or pranayama, it can help you with your coordination, your flexibility, strength, your balance, and it can help maybe even reduce pain. improve your posture, and prevent injuries. Mentally, it can help you develop self-awareness and self-acceptance and self-compassion, which helps us to tackle our stress, anxiety, depression.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Absolutely.
I think that those two actually relate. And I'll think of a practical example for you. In classes, I teach students that are in their 20s all the way up to their 80s. And everybody has very different physical abilities, and they all come for different reasons, like you said. But when I teach my students about this 8-limbed path of yoga, it helps them realize that no matter what your physical ability is, you're giving yourself this gift of practice. You're giving yourself this gift of trying to live a more right way of life that treats yourself and others with love and with kindness, all so you can try and feel more at peace and at bliss in your experience. And that doesn't matter if you can balance on your hands, or you can stand on your head, or you can balance on your big toe or something, right? Like none of that matters. What matters is how you treat yourself and others throughout that experience. And that just gives people so much more space to feel welcome and included in the yoga classroom and in the world, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Definitely goes with like, it's the holistic approach to like doing all of this, not just being able to do the asanas or specific asanas. So yeah,
Yeah, and anybody can do it. They're welcome. They're all welcome. Everybody's welcome.
absolutely. Cool. It also helps with emotional problems. Maybe you have a problem managing difficult emotions like anger and sadness and grief. So yoga, the 8-limbed path, can also help with that. You can improve your relationships with others and just develop a more compassionate and ethical outlook on life. Spiritually, it can help you find meaning and purpose in life. So if you feel really scattered, you don't really understand your place in the world, then following the 8-limbed path can help you find that meaning and find that purpose. When we practice this 8-limb path, though, tell us about some of the challenges that we might find.
Oh gosh. I think my answer for you right now, Farron, is going to be a little bit colored by the world that we live in today's day and age. I, Social media, especially, and just media in general, I feel like is such a part of our culture and influences so much of the world that we see around us that it helps us detach from this path that we should be walking. So today, as we're recording this, our world is not in an awesome place environmentally. It's not in an awesome place within our country for the rights of minorities. It's not in an awesome place for the rights of women, for the rights of immigrants. It's not in an awesome place religiously. The global world is at war. Like, it's not an easy time to be alive. And for us to be sitting here saying, like, just treat each other with love and with kindness and get comfortable in your body so you can sit and breathe and focus on one thing. So then you focus on nothing and you feel bliss. Like, that feels so disconnected for me from where we are. And I think that's what makes part of this a challenge, because if we all were to start looking from the first limb to live nonviolent lives, ahimsa, that is our first yama, so much of what I just said would be irrelevant, because we would all be living in a place of loving kindness and not of fear, anger, spite.
Like literally solve all the world's problems and like actually obtain world peace if everyone just practiced yoga, all 8 limbs of it.
Yeah. And it's irrelevant of religion, of culture. It's the first limb, the first little part of the first limb, nonviolence. That in of itself is a challenge. People hate. People are influenced by propaganda, by rhetoric. Like, there is so much pain in this world just because people can't practice that very first tiny little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about the challenges of practicing this 8-limb path, it's how the heck do you do that when the world around you feels like it's crumbling, right? That in of itself, like how do we not react to the hate and the fear in this world and go inward, and then be able to also go outward with kindness, with compassion, with truth, with speaking out in service for others, and still find these moments of like, oh, I've gone so inward that I'm experiencing this bliss. It's hard. It's not even just hard to practice. It's hard to even justify taking the space for that when it can feel so isolating when so many other people around you aren't behaving that way.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
And it's just hard, right? Like it's hard to
Mhm.
remember all of these things, not just the 8 limbs, but within them, there are so many aspects that we'll get into on different episodes of our show. But to remember it all and to live a life rooted in that and know that it's okay to falter, but to come back, right? Back to Sutra 1.1 now is yoga. So when
Mhm.
you by accident aren't living a life with intentional, purposeful breath and meditative absorption and truthfulness and contentment, you can start again and again and again. The challenge is to be able to keep it and then give yourself space to begin again and know that just because you slipped doesn't mean that you failed.
This is where my quote comes in: yoga is a practice, not a perfect.
Yeah, it fits with so many different themes. It
Yep.
really does. And I think as teachers, it's hard to theme a class around the 8 limbs in general. Like, I know this isn't just about the challenges of our students, but it's the challenges of our teachers, because I think it's hard to take such a big, broad, lofty topic and make it relatable to people, especially when there's so much going on in the world and with yourselves personally. It's easier to find like little things to teach rather than just this big, huge 8 limbed path to
Yeah.
inspire people. But I think in general, when we're teaching or when we're practicing yoga and the 8 limb path, and we face these giant challenges that can feel insurmountable, I think it helps to come back to the results that you're going to experience by doing it, by doing the work and by coming back to the work every time you slip. And listen, like we're sitting here, Farron and I, talking to you about this, and yet I'm sure I have, even just within, it's now in Massachusetts 9:37 in the morning, which means it's 6:37 in the morning for Farron, and I'm sure both of us have already slipped on this 8 limb path, even just since waking up,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
But we come back to the practice because of some of the results we can experience, I think.
Yeah. So those results, those good, awesome, juicy results, we can obviously, with the asana practice, which is the one that we think of the most, we improve our physical health. But there's so much more to yoga than that, as we've seen with all of these different 8 limbs. And I think the most important one is feeling really authentic, because, like I said, you can't just go onto your mat, practice for an hour, and then step off of it and just be a complete asshole. That's where the yamas and the niyamas come in. So I think just living in authenticity is one of the coolest benefits of practicing the 8 limbed path, is you feel authentic. Like, I am actually practicing yoga every minute of my life. I mean, trying to, at least, instead of just the 60 minutes that I'm on my mat. You can also improve your mental health, like we talked about before. You can increase your self awareness and your personal growth. You develop self discipline, focus, and concentration with practicing, the meditation, the sense withdrawal, and let's speak Sanskrit here, the pratyahara and the dharana and the dhyana. You can find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, because the 8 limbed path of yoga is ultimately a spiritual path. And it's a way to connect with your inner self and find your own place in the world. I think that's a huge result right there.
It is, Farron. And I just want to comment for a minute about the difference between spirituality and religion, because I think a lot of people get, when we talk about the 8 limb path and the spiritual quest, essentially, if you want to call it that, I think for some people that can feel conflicting to their religious traditions.
Yeah,
But I don't believe, yeah, but I don't believe that spirituality and religion are, I think that you can feel spiritual by practicing religion, but I don't think that you need to practice religion to be spiritual. I'll give a personal example. Like, I am Jewish, hard time right now, right? But I am Jewish, and I am also on this spiritual yogic path, and I feel my spiritual connection oftentimes more in my practice of yoga than I do sitting in a temple as a Jew, celebrating and observing my religion. But they don't take away from each other. And I think in our fear-based culture, people often think that they do, and that it's threatening for them to be on this spiritual journey through yoga, and it can threaten their religion. Do you experience this sometimes in conversation with people, or have you heard this before?
Oh, absolutely. I think I've told you before in our Marco Polo conversations that I've lost friends because of this, because they think that it conflicts with their Christianity. And so they therefore cannot practice yoga and they can no longer be friends with me because I am practicing yoga. And it's just, it seems so bizarre to me because I'm like, okay, if you actually practice these 8 limbs, I think it would make you a maybe like a stronger Christian or like a more authentic one because
Just
they
like a
do
more
go.
compassionate human, right?
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And I think that there's like this misconception that yoga is a religion or that we follow like Hindu traditions or like honor Hindu gods, but it's not. I mean, we haven't talked about that one time during this whole discussion about 8 limbs. So, yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, I can see it. I'm a Libra. I can always see all sides of everything. So I can see how they can think that. Yeah, no, it's definitely spirituality and religion are two separate things, but they can also hold each other's hand.
Yeah, and we do in these 8 limbs, there is Ishvara Pranidhana does talk about surrendering to the divine, right? And I think that that's where people all of a sudden are like, oh, God's name just came into this. So this is now
Mhm.
crossing to religion. But I don't necessarily believe that the divine means God or the religious connotation of God. It's for me, it's this like universal collective energy that surrounds everything in this sphere that we know as life.
Yeah, that's how I see it too.
Yeah, and that's really important for me to always make that distinction and connection. Like I've never used the word God actually in my teaching of yoga. I feel like it sort of makes it a little bit less relatable to the general public, right? So if we use words like energy and collective consciousness and divine energy or just energy in general, I feel like it's a little bit more approachable. But I just think it's important when we're talking about this spiritual path to have this little side conversation.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
We can also find the personal liberation of living in our authentic selves on and off of our mat, and that potential of reaching samadhi, the state of oneness with all that is. So that, I mean, that's like a super huge benefit, right? That's the goal. That's the goal of yoga, reach that state of samadhi.
100%.
So, as we're teaching class, Heidi, can you give us some type of thematic through line phrase that we can keep referring to throughout class?
Yeah, I think one that I would use, I like to have students notice and observe as they're taking class to really connect them to their own experience. So perhaps something like notice and observe your thoughts and your actions. Are they in alignment with the 8 limbed path? Something like that.
Mm, yeah.
I think it would help students come back to this idea to every little thought, breath, action that I'm taking on my mat. And maybe that's one. Every little thought and action I take on my mat connects me to the 8 limb path.
Do you have any more?
I do. Thanks, Farron. What about what can you do to show up completely as your authentic self?
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. All right. So there's 3 for you. Noticing and observing how your yoga practice on your mat connects you to your 8 limbed practice. Every little thought and action I take on my mat connects me to the 8 limbed path. And what can you do to show up completely as your authentic self?
Great.
So, yeah. So now that we've sort of talked around this Dharma talk, we have our thematic through line. What other inspiration related to the 8 limbed path of yoga do you think we could use to support and enhance our theme?
All of the little extras that we have for you to help you enhance your theme are found on our inspo sheets. You can find that at themeweaversyoga.com/episode 6. We list all of those out for you. So on that sheet, we have some inspirational quotes that remind us of walking the 8 limbed path. There are a few songs to help bring that theme to life as well if you do practice and teach to music, as well as some mantras, some mudras, pranayama techniques, postures, and meditation to weave into your class.
Yeah, I think also using this theme, this is to empower you as teachers when times feel heavy in your life, whether it's because of what's going on in the world around you or with your own personal world. I think teaching a class with the theme of the 8 limb path really helps you authentically connect to why you're doing what you're doing. And it gives people a focus to try and bring them back to that positive mission of why we're practicing yoga regardless of all the things that are happening in the world. It just gives you that bit of grounding in your teaching. And it doesn't, for me, it feels a little bit more authentic showing up that way versus being like the horrible things are happening in the world and they're personally affecting you. And you're like, today we're going to study bliss and how showing up on your mat just makes you feel blissful.
Yeah. And you're just like, what the hell?
Right. You're sitting there and you're like, why are we doing this right now? How does this connect me to the yoga practice? This doesn't feel real. Like there's too much pain that's happening in the world to make this like, yeah, practice yoga. I feel bliss. It takes you deeper in a more authentic, vulnerable, real way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think now that we're winding down your physical practice and you're preparing to walk off of your mat, you can notice how your yoga practice does not have to end there. Every moment is an opportunity to create a new way of showing up in your life, a new opportunity to bring awareness to exploring the 8-limb path. So as you walk off your mat, set an intention of exploring beyond asana to find a meaningful life and possibly find your way to samadhi and then back again. How do we bring that back? Let's put this all together and into our beautiful little packaged bow of how you can follow our 6-step process of theme weaving. First, we name the theme.
The 8 limbs of yoga.
We name a few problems that it solves.
Physical problems like lack of flexibility, strength, coordination, mental problems like stress, anxiety, depression, emotional problems like difficulty managing strong emotions like anger, sadness, and grief, and spiritual problems like just feeling scattered and like you don't understand your place in the world.
Yeah. And then the third part is talking about the challenges that can arise. And that's things like the world is gone to shit. And it's hard to feel connected to an 8-limb path when that's happening. Feeling like you've failed already. So giving up on this practice when in reality we can always begin it again. And then the fourth step is to name some awesome results of practicing an 8-limb path to actually give your students hope rather than just challenge.
Samadhi is definitely the big one, but there are some other results that might be a little bit more tangible to them. So just like increased awareness and personal growth, a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, and improved physical and mental health. And just that feeling of being authentic, that you're not just a yogi when you are on your mat, but you're also a yogi in your life.
Yeah. So that way, when you're showing up in the world, you align your actions with what you're teaching. So you're actually doing as you're teaching and not just teaching and then being out of alignment.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. Or
And you should
no.
just do as I say and as I do.
Yeah.
Don't do
Something
that
like
old phrase that we say as parents. Parents are always like, do as I say, not as I do. But like, no, just like do as I say and do as I do.
Yeah.
And then your thematic through line to weave throughout the class as you drop that hammer over and over again. Notice and observe how your yoga practice on your mat connects you to the 8-limb practice. Every little thought and action I take on my mat connects me to the 8-limb path. What can you do to show up completely as your authentic self? And then lastly, you just wrap it up with a beautiful bow, concluding at the end of class, either at the end of Shavasana, reminding your students that they can take this practice off of their mat as they walk throughout their day, continuing their own practice of yoga and the 8-limb path. Now go to our website, themeweaversyoga.com/episode 6. The link is also found in the show notes wherever you're listening. And request the inspo sheet that Farron works so hard on for the 8-limb path to help you bring this theme alive in your own voice, in your own practice and teaching. Then please reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or email, all the places, and let us know how this lands. And if you use the theme, how did it work for you? How did your students take it? We're here to support you in your class preparation and in how you deliver it. So let us know how we can be of the most support and service to you.
Yeah, and then tune in next week for another episode of Theme Weavers, and we'll have you prepared to go on and inspire your students in your next class. If you're unsure on the structure of how to weave your theme throughout class, go back to episode 2. And until next time,
We weave you in peace.